recording. Okay, so let's look at some examples of compounds which we are going to electrolyze. So, yeah. So we have molten lead to bromide. Now a molten form of an ionic compound contains only the ions which are present in that ionic compound. It does not contain any other ion. Okay. If we have pure lead to bromide and we melt it at a very high temperature, so we get molten lead to bromide, right? So we get PP and Br2, right? Now, obviously, the lead ions are positively charged, right? So they will be discharged at the cathode, that is a negative electrode, right? And not in solution. So these are the only positive ions. See, that's what I was talking about. So this is a molten form. And the bromine is discharged at the anode. So yeah, and because it's not in solution, so these are the only negative ions present, right? Same goes for the hydrochloric acid. Same goes for the uh, same goes for hydrochloric acid, right? But what if you have a concentrated sodium chloride solution? So yeah, you have a concentrated sodium chloride solution. So, you know, in a concentrated sodium chloride solution, this is not the molten form of sodium chloride, right? This is like NaCl aqueous. So what ions are present in this aqueous solution? So if you talk about the positive ions, so we have sodium, right? And we have the hydrogen ion. So yeah, on the negative ions, you have the chlorine and we have the hydroxide. Okay. Acha. Ab, what did we learn about the rule at the anode? We learned that normally the hydrogen gas, sorry, normally the uh, oxygen is produced at the anode, and that is from the hydroxide in water, unless you have halide ions present, right? So in this case, we do have a halide ion present, right? We have chlorine, we have chloride ions. This is a halide ion. So that's why the chloride ions go to the anode and chlorine gas is produced instead, right? Because chloride are halide ions. On the cathode, अब cathode का हम rule क्या पढ़ा था कि normally hydrogen is produced, right? Unless there is a less reactive metal present. So sodium is not less reactive at all as compared to hydrogen, right? Sodium is way more reactive than hydrogen. So that's why hydrogen gas is being produced. And you would argue that why not sodium? And I just explained the reason that sodium is less reactive. Sorry, sodium is more reactive as compared to hydrogen. And that's why preferentially hydrogen will get discharged at the cathode and chloride will get discharged at the anode. So guys, you need to remember the rules for anode and cathode. Uh, in more advanced electrolysis, it's not really that simple. The uh, exact species that gets discharged depends on many factors. Okay. And one of the most important factors is reactivity, okay, which we just talked about. So one of the most important factors is reactivity. Another important factor is the concentration. Okay. How much concentration of that ionic compound is present in the solution, right? So that also determines okay, which of these two species will get discharged. So, Acha, now let's look at another example, similar example. We have dilute sulfuric acid. Dilute sulfuric acid has H plus ions. Let's look at the positive ions. So, Maham, what are the positive ions in this scenario?
Hydrogen.
Hydrogen. Okay, only hydrogen. What are the negative ions? Okay, this is our last example till the
Oxygen.
end. No, it's not oxygen. Oxygen means hydroxide. Okay, hydroxide is a negative ion. इसके अलावा और sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is H2SO4. So we have the sulfate ions as well, right? So we have SO4 2 negative. right? So we have the sulfate ion as well. So these are the negative ions, and this is the positive ion. I don't know क्यों करता है ऐसा. So okay, so since the only positive ion that is present is hydrogen, so obviously the hydrogen gas will be produced at the cathode, right? Because there are because there are no other types of ions present. But if we talk about the anode, right? So hydroxide is discharged at the anode, right? And oxygen gas is produced. The reason is that we learned about a rule कि at the anode, if if it's like a aqueous solution, so the hydroxide ion will get discharged unless there are halide ions present. Are there halide ions present in sulfuric acid? Aslan?
Yes.
No. In sulfuric acid, where are halide ions? Halide ions जो होते हैं group 7 के ions होते हैं. So halide ions are not present in sulfuric acid. So halide ions are basically the chlorine, bromine, iodine, ठीक है, chloride, bromide, iodide, acetatide, fluoride, ये halide ions होते हैं. So we have sulfate, ठीक है, this is not a halide ion, right? And that's why hydroxide will get preferentially discharged, and this will produce oxygen at the anode, right? So in this lecture, we learned about we had introduction to electrolysis. We learned about the working of an electrochemical cell, the principle behind it, and we also learned about some of the rules at the cathode and anode, and we also, went over some examples. And I think, uh, you have a really good idea about electrolysis, but there's more to it, and inshallah we'll be discussing it next week. So अगर यहाँ तक समझ आ गया, so you may leave the class. That's the end.